My husband tore my boarding pass in half at gate 14 and smiled doing it. He landed in Geneva thinking he'd won. He had no idea I was already there. The pieces floated down like confetti at a funeral. That's the image I keep coming back to. Not Deshawn's face, though I've replayed that too. The casual cruelty of it, the way his mouth curved like he was enjoying something private. Not Vanessa in her cream coat, arm already threaded through his before the torn paper hit the floor. Not the people at gate 14 who saw everything and looked away, the way people always look away when a woman gets erased in public. Just the paper, falling in slow motion, white against the gray airport tile. Deshawn leaned down close enough that I could smell his cologne, the one I'd given him for our 10th anniversary, and said very quietly, "You should have known when to walk away, Renee." 12 years. One sentence. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not give him a single thing he could use. Instead, I got down on my knees, right there, on that cold floor, in front of everyone, and I picked up every piece, every torn scrap of that boarding pass. I smoothed them flat against my palm and tucked them into my purse with the same steadiness I use when I'm closing a balance sheet. Deshawn laughed. Vanessa laughed. They walked toward the first-class jetway, and I sat down in a metal chair by the window and watched their backs disappear. Then I made one call. "It's me," I said when Claire answered. "He did it. They boarded. Move forward." "Already moving," she said. I hung up and looked out at the tarmac. It was 6:14 in the morning. The sky over Atlanta was the color of a bruise healing. I had a flight to catch. I need to back up, because none of this makes sense without the 12 years that came before that morning, and none of those 12 years make sense without understanding who Deshawn Carter was when I married him, and who I was when I said yes. I was 29. He was 32. We met at a small business development conference in Charlotte where he was pitching his logistics company, Carter Distribution, to a room of potential investors who weren't quite biting. I was there representing the accounting firm where I worked, doing financial consulting for small business owners trying to get their operations clean enough to attract capital. I watched him pitch. He was magnetic, genuinely brilliant about the operational side, be routing efficiency, last mile delivery, the specific inefficiencies in regional freight that nobody was solving, but his financials were a mess. His projections were optimistic to the point of fantasy. His cost structure had holes you could drive one of his trucks through. After the session, I walked up and told him exactly that. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he laughed, a real laugh, not a polished one, and said, "Buy you a coffee and tell me how bad it actually is?" That was the beginning of everything. I fixed his financials, restructured his cost projections, helped him put together a presentation that was honest and still compelling. 3 months later, he got his first serious investor. 6 months after that, we were together. A year after that, we were married. I want to be precise about what I contributed to Carter Distribution, because Deshawn spent 12 years subtly rewriting that history, and I refuse to let the revisions stand. I co-signed the first SBA loan when the bank flagged his personal credit, my signature, my credit history on the line. When the company hit a cash flow crisis in year 2, slower receivables than projected, a big client paying 90 days late, I covered the payroll shortfall from my personal savings account, $42,000. I did not make him sign a promissory note because he was my husband and I trusted him. I did the books at night. After our son Jordan fell asleep, I would sit at the kitchen table with a glass of water and the company accounts, reconciling, categorizing, flagging anything that needed his attention. I maintained our QuickBooks system, prepared the documentation for every audit, filed the quarterly sales tax returns in 4 states. When Deshawn needed to focus on operations and sales, the financial infrastructure of his company was something he could take for granted because I was maintaining it. None of this was secret. None of it was disputed at the time. It only became inconvenient later. The first sign was so small, I genuinely didn't register it as a sign. 14 months ago, Deshawn mentioned offhandedly that he was simplifying the ownership structure of Carter Distribution to prepare for a major deal. He said it the way you say I'm reorganizing the garage, like it was administrative housekeeping, slightly boring, nothing that required my attention. I asked a few questions. He gave brief answers. I told myself he would loop me in on anything that needed my signature. He did not loop me in. 8 months ago, the hours started. He was working late, genuinely, he said, because the Geneva deal was in its critical phase. Carter Distribution was in serious negotiations with a European logistics consortium, a deal that would value the company at somewhere between $18 and $22 million. The biggest thing Deshawn had ever done. I was proud of him. I told him so. 5 months ago, a colleague of mine saw Deshawn at a restaurant in Buckhead. Private table. Woman across from him laughing. My colleague texted me a photo. "Is this your husband?" Asking because they seem very comfortable. And I told myself it was a client dinner. I told myself that for 3 weeks. Then I found the emails. It was a Thursday evening. Jordan was at his grandmother's for the weekend. I was at the shared desktop in the home office looking for a property tax document I'd filed digitally 8 months earlier. The desktop was Deshawn's primarily, but we'd always shared it. Joint filing system, family photos, the company Dropbox. His email was open. He'd left a browser tab running. I almost closed it without looking. Almost. The subject line of the most recent email stopped me cold. Renee, ownership removal, final structure. I sat very still for approximately 30 seconds. Then I read it. The email thread was between Deshawn and his brother Marcus. Marcus Carter, corporate attorney, 11 years in practice, the kind of man who speaks in complete legal sentences even at family barbecues. I had never particularly liked Marcus suspicious, but I had trusted him the way you trust family-adjacent people, without examining it too carefully. I should have examined it. The plan was laid out across 17 emails spanning 4 months. Clean, careful, and ugly in the way that only premeditated things can be ugly. The ownership restructuring Deshawn had mentioned 14 months ago wasn't administrative housekeeping. Marcus had filed new articles of incorporation for Carter Distribution LLC, reframing the ownership structure so that Deshawn held the company through a newly created holding entity, one that did not include my name. My name, meanwhile, remained attached to the original debt instruments, the co-signed SBA loan, the personal guarantee I'd signed in year 3, the line of credit we'd opened in year 5. All the risk, none of the reward. This needs to be clean before Geneva, Deshawn had written in the most recent email. If she's on the cap table when we close, we lose negotiating leverage and she gets half. The new structure keeps her off the upside and on the hook for the legacy debt. Marcus, does this hold? Marcus's reply was 4 sentences long. It holds. The 2019 restructuring covers the gap. She'd have to prove fraudulent intent, which requires evidence we haven't left. Make sure the Geneva documentation shows you as sole owner. Investors don't need to know about the domestic situation. I read that last paragraph 4 times. Investors don't need to know about the domestic situation. He had shown investors false ownership information. He had presented himself as the sole owner of a company I was legally tied to, without disclosure. If those investors committed capital based on that representation, the entire deal was constructed on fraud. My hands were not shaking. They were very still, the way your body goes still when it's trying to process something that doesn't fit any category you have available. I took screenshots, 12 of them. I emailed them to a personal account Deshawn didn't know about. Then I closed the tab, exactly as I'd found it. I went to the kitchen, made tea, sat at the table, and thought for a long time. Then I called Claire. Claire Whitman has been a family law attorney in Atlanta for 19 years. She is 5 feet 2 inches tall, speaks in a quiet voice that never rises, and has a reputation in Georgia's legal community for being the attorney that other attorneys don't want to see across the table. A law school friend had recommended her to me 2 years ago, offhandedly, saying if you ever need someone, call Claire in the tone people use when they're saying something more than they're saying. I had saved the number. I called her at 9:47 p.m. on that Thursday. She listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Send me what you have tonight," she said. "Don't touch anything else on that computer. Don't confront him. Don't change your behavior at all. I need 48 hours to look at this." I sent her the screenshots. 48 hours later, she called me back. "This isn't just dirty," she said. "This is criminal. The restructuring alone is potentially fraudulent conveyance. But the Geneva piece, presenting as sole owner to foreign investors without disclosure, that's securities fraud territory. That's federal." The word federal landed in the middle of my chest. "I need you to get me everything," she said. "Every financial document from the last 12 years, tax returns, bank statements, the original loan documents, any filing that has your name on it, everything." I spent the next week pulling records while acting like nothing was wrong. I made dinner. I asked about his day. I listened to him talk about Geneva with something that must have looked like wifely pride, because he never flinched, never seemed suspicious. Deshawn had been so thoroughly convinced that I was the smaller, simpler person in our marriage that it never occurred to him I might be doing anything other than what I appeared to be doing. That was his first mistake. It would not be his last. Claire's paralegal, a meticulous woman named Dorinda Hayes who had spent 11 years doing forensic document analysis before moving to family law, spent 4 days going through everything I provided. What she found made both of us go quiet. The 2019 restructuring Marcus had referenced in the emails was real. Deshawn had filed new corporate documents that year, and he had done it without my knowledge or consent. My name had been removed from the operating agreement of Carter Distribution LLC and transferred to a shell entity, Carter Legacy Holdings, that held only the debt instruments and had no equity stake in the business operations. "He forged your signature," Dorinda said. Not a question. "On the 2019 restructuring documents? On 3 filings. The operating agreement amendment, the equity transfer, and the new articles of incorporation." She laid 3 pages in front of me. "Compare these to anything you actually signed." I looked at them. The signatures were good, close enough that I would have missed them in passing, but I knew my own handwriting, and there was a quality to the R at the start of my name that was wrong, too deliberate, like someone had practiced it. "How confident are you?" I asked. "Confident enough that I've already referred it to a handwriting analyst." She said it the way you say I've already started the coffee. "Raymond Chu. He's testified in federal court 11 times. I sat with that for a moment. My husband had forged my signature on 3 legal documents to remove me from a company I had helped build, leaving me tied only to its debts. Then I thought about Geneva and the investors and the false ownership representation, and I realized that Deshawn hadn't just been careless. He'd been meticulous. He'd just been meticulous about the wrong things. Claire found Eleanor Voss through the Geneva deal documentation. Eleanor Voss, lead investor, managing partner of Voss Capital Group based in Zurich, 61 years old, former regulatory attorney with the SEC, zero tolerance for anything that smelled like fraud, a reputation built on walking away from deals that other people wanted to close. She had passed on a $200 million acquisition 4 years ago when she found a single financial misrepresentation in the due diligence materials. A single one. If she signed on to this deal based on false ownership information, Claire said, she will want to to know, immediately. The question is how we approach her without tipping off Deshawn. We send her the documents, I said. No cover letter, no emotion, just facts. Claire looked at me for a moment. That's exactly right. We assembled a packet. The original corporate documents showing my legal ownership interest. The forged 2019 filings. The email thread from the shared desktop. Raymond Chu's preliminary handwriting analysis, which was now formal and documented. The co-signed loan paperwork. 12 years of tax returns showing my name on the business filings. No narrative. No victim language. No my husband is betraying me. Just a timeline. Just evidence. Just facts in chronological order with every document numbered and sourced. We sent it to Eleanor Voss's office on a Wednesday afternoon. Thursday, no response. Friday, no response. I was beginning to think I'd miscalculated when her assistant called at 4:15 on Friday. Eleanor would review the materials over the weekend. She would be in touch before the Geneva meetings began. 2 days later, she agreed to review it all in Geneva. She did not tell Deshawn she'd been contacted. She did not tell him anything had changed. She simply kept the meeting on the calendar and said nothing. Here is what Deshawn thought was happening. He thought he had won. He had the deal on the verge of closing, the ownership structure redrawn in his favor, his brother's legal fingerprints on documentation that would be very hard to challenge. He had booked the Geneva trip as a kind of victory lap. First class, the Mandarin Oriental, Vanessa in a cream coat standing next to him like a trophy he'd finally allowed himself to claim publicly. He had invited me to the airport. I want you to understand that. He had invited me to the airport. He wanted me there, at the gate, watching him leave. He wanted to do something in that public space that would be humiliating and final, and would feel, to him, like a clean ending. He tore my boarding pass because he had bought me a ticket in the first place, specifically so he could destroy it in front of me. That is how confident he was. That is how thoroughly he believed that I was the smaller person in our marriage. Claire had booked me a separate flight 3 days earlier. Different airline, different hotel, the Hotel des Bergs, across the river from the Mandarin Oriental. I would arrive 12 hours after Deshawn and Vanessa, which meant by the time I landed, they would be settled, comfortable, certain the narrative was proceeding exactly as planned. I landed at Geneva International at 6:52 in the evening, local time. The Alps were visible through the terminal windows, white and absolute and indifferent. I checked in. I ordered room service. I laid out every document on the hotel room desk in the order we had rehearsed, reviewed it all until past midnight, and then I slept for 6 hours, the deepest, cleanest sleep I'd had in months. At 9:47 the next morning, I put on a charcoal blazer and flat shoes and took a taxi to the address Claire had given me. The meeting was scheduled for 10 SAG. I arrived at 9:58. The conference room was on the 4th floor. Clean, European, floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at Lake Geneva. Deshawn was already at the presentation screen, his slides pulled up, the confidence radiating off him the way it always did when he was about to perform. He had his back to the door when I walked in. I closed the door behind me. He turned, and I watched it happen. I had imagined this moment in various forms for 3 weeks, but nothing I had imagined quite captured the physical reality of watching certainty drain out of a person's face in real time. The color, the posture, the particular blankness that settles in when the mind encounters something it cannot immediately categorize. He said my name, just my name. Renee, like a question, like a malfunction. The room was still. 4 people from Voss Capital Group sat around the conference table, and none of them moved. At the head of the table, Eleanor Voss sat with her hands folded on top of a manila folder. The folder, I recognized the tab, the one we'd sent her, and she looked at me with an expression that was not surprise. She had known I was coming. She simply said, "Ms. Carter, we've been expecting you. Please sit down." Deshawn said, "What is this?" Eleanor said, "Sit down, Mr. Carter." And something in her voice, 19 years of regulatory law, of walking away from deals that smelled wrong, of being the person in the room who never needed to raise her voice, made him sit. What happened next took 47 minutes. Eleanor's legal counsel, a Swiss attorney named Petra Haas, who had flown in specifically for this meeting, laid out the discrepancy between the ownership documentation Deshawn had provided to Voss Capital and the actual legal structure of Carter Distribution. She was precise and unhurried and completely without drama, which somehow made it worse. Raymond Chu's handwriting analysis was presented as Exhibit C, the forged signatures side by side with authenticated samples, 3 documents, 3 forgeries. The email thread, Marcus advising Deshawn to keep the domestic situation out of the investor documentation, was Exhibit D. Deshawn's attorney, who had flown over with him, tried twice to interrupt. Petra Haas said, "You'll have an opportunity to respond," both times, and continued. At the 23-minute mark, Deshawn looked at me, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years, and I saw the moment he understood, not just that the deal was over, but that he had built this specific outcome himself, brick by brick, email by email, one forged signature at a time. I did not look away. At the end of the 47 minutes, Eleanor Voss closed the folder, looked at Deshawn, and said 4 sentences. "Voss Capital is withdrawing from this transaction. I will be referring this matter to our legal team for formal notification to the appropriate regulatory bodies. I suggest you retain separate counsel from your brother immediately." She paused. That's all. She stood. Her team stood. They filed out. Deshawn sat at the table with his attorney. He didn't move for a long time. I stood up, collected my copies of every document, and put them in my bag. At the door, I stopped. I thought about saying something clean and final, the kind of line that would play well in the retelling. I thought about 12 years. I thought about the boarding pass in my purse, the torn pieces I'd smoothed flat on the airport floor. In the end, I said nothing. I walked out. The consequences came in stages, the way they always do. Voss Capital's formal notification triggered a review by the Georgia Secretary of State's office, which referred the forgery findings to the state attorney general. Claire worked with the AG's office directly. Her contact there was an investigator named Dennis Okafor, 15 years in white-collar financial crime, who told her within a week that the case was straightforward, in a tone that suggested he was being polite. Marcus Carter was disbarred 18 months later. The State Bar of Georgia found that he had knowingly assisted in the preparation of fraudulent corporate documents and provided legal counsel in furtherance of a scheme to defraud. He surrendered his license without appeal. The criminal case against Deshawn moved more slowly. Forgery in the first degree, 3 counts, plus the securities fraud referral from Voss Capital. His attorney negotiated. Claire's office worked with the prosecution. At 14 months, he pleaded guilty to 2 counts of forgery and 1 count of fraudulent misrepresentation to investors. He was sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, 250 hours of community service, and restitution. The restitution number was arrived at through evaluation of Carter Distribution at the time of the fraudulent restructuring, accounting for my legal ownership interest. The company had been worth approximately $9 million at the 2019 filing. My equity stake, properly calculated, was 40%, $3.6 million. He had also stolen 12 years. The courts couldn't help me with that part. The divorce was finalized 7 months after Geneva. Jordan, who was 15 and not a child who could be fooled about what had happened, chose to live with me during the school year. He sees his father on alternating weekends and handles it with a maturity that simultaneously breaks my heart and makes me proud. Vanessa, for what it's worth, was gone before the criminal charges were filed. She departed with the same efficiency she'd arrived with. No drama. She simply recalculated. I took a job as CFO of a mid-sized logistics company 6 months after the divorce. The irony of the industry was not lost on me. I'm good at it. I was always good at it. The settlement money went into a trust for Jordan's education and a modest investment portfolio. I bought a house in Decatur, 3 bedrooms, a good school district, a kitchen with enough counter space that I can actually cook. I got a dog, a ridiculous golden retriever named Gerald, who has no concept of my legal situation and loves me unconditionally. Claire Whitman came to dinner 2 months ago. We drank wine and talked for 4 hours, and she told me that in 19 years of family law, she had never had a client walk into a Geneva boardroom quite the way I had. Most people want to confront, she said. Scream. Get the emotional satisfaction in the moment. That's what he wanted, I said. At the airport, he wanted me to scream. I know. He had no idea what to do when I didn't. I thought about the boarding pass. I still have it. The torn pieces, smoothed flat, tucked into the back of a desk drawer. I don't look at it often, but sometimes when I need to remember what it felt like to choose stillness over reaction, to pick up the pieces instead of throwing them back, I take it out. Silence isn't weakness. It never was. It's the sound of someone who already knows what happens next.